This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in. It's been another week filled with surprises, and we've got your balanced debate. We begin with the confusion, controversy, and crisis in our university system, which started with President Margaret Spelling's departure and the bombshell of UNC President Carol Folt's resignation. Then we'll talk about a report showing that our third grade students are actually doing worse than when we started the Read to Achieve program, why it's failed, and how do we fix it. And as always, we get the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of this week's panel, we have Brad Crone, political and communications consultant, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, our senior political analyst, and Beavon, a political analyst. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Many of the 300,000 uninsured in our state are volunteer firefighters, farmers, fishermen, and small business owners. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
UNC President Margaret Spelling's last day was last week, but before she left, she wrote a grace-filled column and optimistic op-ed piece to newspapers across the state, saying she thought the best was yet to come for our university system. But on Monday, the tone was a lot different. The UNC Board of Governors met for 3 hours behind closed doors to discuss personnel matters. But before they concluded their special meeting, UNC Chancellor Carol Folt startled everyone by announcing her resignation and at the same time saying she was going to remove the rest of the Silent Sam statue from campus. The Board of Governors was obviously miffed to learn about this resignation like the rest of us. I want to ask each of you, I want to get to the bombshell resignation news, but first let me ask you, how would you evaluate Margaret Spelling's first 3 years as president? Chris?
I think she did a pretty good job. I think that I don't think she realized the firestorm she was walking into. She was not the choice of the Senate leadership. They made that clear. The people who selected her on the search committee, the Board of Governors, were not reelected by the Senate. So I think she walked into a job where she was not popular with some of the people who put the Board of Governors there. I think I think her original goal was to stay at least 5 years. The fact that she left after 3, I think, shows that she was trying to do some things the board didn't like, or her management style didn't mesh. And I think she was unfortunately here at a bad time in North Carolina politics. Not too long ago, we had a board that was bipartisan, that worked with the president, whoever he or she was. Those days are gone, and I think her departure is evidence of that.
Beavon, how would you evaluate it?
Well, I would actually question whether or not she was set up for success in this role. She came in when HB 2 became law, and most recently there's been a lot of controversy around Silent Sam, and it's clear that she has a lot of conflict with the Board of Governors. And so I think that she's done the best as she could.
Okay.
Both Chris and AB make a good foundational argument. The fact is, the Senate wanted Peter Hans to come in and be the president rather than Margaret Spellings. She was hamstrung from the get-go. They should have put Peter in there and let him run it. I believe Peter would be a consensus builder and would have been a better choice than Margaret Spellings.
John Hood, how would you evaluate President Spelling?
Well, I guess I would add to what has been said. There were several events that happened during the last several years that I think Spellings will feel good about, feel like it was an accomplishment. The biggest one, perhaps, if you think statewide for the system as a whole, which I know is hard for some people who are only wedded to their particular schools. But you think about the system as a whole, as the NC Promise system, which has significantly reduced tuition at Western Carolina, University of North Carolina at Pembroke, and Elizabeth City State, and that has affected all three of those campuses. Pembroke perhaps a little more radically in the short run, but Elizabeth City perhaps in the long run will be the biggest beneficiary.
Yeah, it's already gaining in students, I understand. Brad, so far as it goes, I think we can agree on the fact that there's been confusion and controversy recently. Is it fair to say we've got a system in crisis?
Tom, this past week was a big black eye for the state's crown jewel. Interesting thing to me, the whispers going around Raleigh really were questioning the governance and the leadership of the Board of Governors and whether or not there's an erosion of support from donors and key people who have been supportive of the university system.
Any other comments on this, John, Annabelle, Chris?
I think it was a big story. I think that it is a significant challenge. I don't think I would use the term crisis, and here's why. For the university system as a whole, whether it's Chapel Hill, NC State, East Carolina, all the other campuses, the operations of these institutions continue. They are still, some of them at least, are gaining significant enrollments. I would describe a crisis like what happened at the University of Missouri a couple of years ago, where you had, not just leadership challenges or bad publicity, but, significant outflows of students, dramatic declines in enrollment, big hits to their budget. I don't see that right now.
How would you describe it?
I would say that it's somewhere in between a crisis and the way John describes it. And I hope what it will do, if there's a silver lining, it will focus more attention on not just how we select the Board of Governors, but who they are. I mean, one of the most outspoken critics of President Spellings, and I think Carol Folt now, is Tom Goolsbee, a former state legislator, who the Secretary of State of North Carolina says cannot offer investment advice because of the way he conducted himself with his law firm and his investment company. We have a member of the Board of Governors who employs 2 members of the legislature full-time at his business. We have a chairman of the Board of Governors who tried to get a contract with a public-private partnership at East Carolina to make money. This is the least examined, powerful board in North Carolina, and if anything comes out of this, I hope that it is more scrutiny on who these people are, how they get elected, what their possible conflicts are.
AB?
The standout to me and what I want to go back to is a little bit of what this has brought up, and it's the understanding or the role of the Board of Governors and the role of the president of the UNC system, and just without a shared vision that there's going to continue to be this conflict, and I think that taking the time to evaluate.
Well, the vision is that they're there to govern, but the president is there to administer.
Tom, I think the pettiness of it, too, is asking Chancellor Folt to leave at the end of the month when she had originally requested to leave right after graduation. Same thing with President Spellings. These are very well-respected educators. Give them the due and the dignity that they deserve.
Well, Brad, that's a pretty good argument. I think the problem that Chancellor Folt created is ordering the removal of the statue plinth in the middle of the night. At the same time she was announcing a resignation. That was virtually daring them to get rid of her more quickly.
Some people say she fell on her own sword.
I think she did fall on her sword, and I think she did it right, too. The middle of the night situation is to diffuse any type of riot situation that you may have between two polar ends of the opposite who see the negative nature of it and then see the historical nature of the
Chris, the real question a lot of people are asking is, what in the world were the Board of Governors doing in that 3-hour special session dealing with personnel? Lots of speculation going on about it, some of which was, okay, the new UNC president, Bill Roper, approving and discussing his new staff, his administrative staff, but there is some speculation that perhaps the BOG was already deciding that they were going to fire her and she just stole their march.
Well, I hope we find that out. I think that could be true. You know, not too long ago, the Board of Governors gave every chancellor in the UNC system a significant pay raise, except Carol Folt and the chancellor at Cecil Staten at East Carolina University, because they were unhappy with he had sort of gently complained about lack of funding in East Carolina, which goes back to Brad's pettiness comment. I hope we have a place where we allow chancellors to speak out and defend their institutions. I'm just worried about what the message all this sends to future people who are qualified who want to work at our university system.
The Board of Governors was obviously fairly surprised by Folt's announcement. Chairman Harry Smith said, we're incredibly disappointed in this intentional action. It lacks transparency and undermines and insults the board's goal to operate with class and dignity. Has this been a board that's been operating with class and dignity?
I would say that the board definitely has not operated at its finest, but the bigger point is that there is a lot of conflict between the two, and I think going back to the pettiness that Brad pointed out, and that.
Well, is it going to be any better with Bill Roper?
Well, Dr. Roper's a fine gentleman and a great academic, a leader in medicine. Has worked for President Reagan, ran the Social Security Administration, truly brings a criteria and a resume that is very well respected. He has his work cut out for him for building consensus among the legislature, among the Board of Governors, and then the institutions that he's got to serve. And he's got to be able to bring all those people together. Okay,
Chancellor Folt removed the base of Silent Sam. Gone forever, or is this controversy going to be re-engaged and renewed and even hotter? John?
There is no solution to the location of Silent Sam that will not make somebody furious, including donors. And this was part of what, and I felt for Chancellor Folt in this case, that you should not assume, if you want to get rid of Silent Sam or you want to preserve it in its current location, you should not assume that North Carolina is with you, because in neither case would you be right. North Carolina is divided about the ultimate location statue. Well, North Carolina is, 70% of North Carolina is unified that taking down the statue illegally was wrong, and that's the problem you've got. You've got people who will be furious if that action is not properly punished.
Now, we saw a letter from the latter part of the week, we saw a letter from 20 former UNC members of trustees who were praising Chancellor Folt for what she had done and supporting them, and essentially told the Board of Governors to butt out in so many respects. Chris, we've heard crickets from over on Jones Street. Nothing from the legislature about all this.
And remember, people don't realize, I don't think, that every member of the Board of Governors was elected and in some ways handpicked by the leadership, the current leadership of the General Assembly. These are not some consensus-building people. These are the folks who the General Assembly leaders want. That's who they work for. That's who they answer to. That's been part of the problem. I do want to get in one quick thing. The most disingenuous thing said the whole time was Harry Smith saying he's for transparency. It was almost 4 years to the day that they fired Tom Ross with Smith's approval. He wasn't the chairman there, but he was on the board, with no notice, with nobody knew what was happening, and whatever you thought of Tom Ross, that was outrageous and was not transparent.
So what's going to happen here? We've had two strong women leaders who have left, and categorizing them as women leaders, I think you got to do that. What's going to happen in the future? Are we going to expect more meddling from the Board of Governors, or is this whole situation going to calm down?
I don't see the situation calming down at all. I think that we're going to see more meddling, a lot of the same, until there's a different.
Any names being mentioned for
my big hope is that Dr.
Roper.
My big hope is that Dr. Roper can rebuild the confidence level in the institution with the supporters across the state. I think that's first and foremost goal for him, and establish better relationships with his faculty and his students.
Well, obviously we'll be watching that very closely. A basic truth in education is that children who can't read can't succeed in the education system. As Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger announced when he introduced the Read to Achieve program, the first 3 years a child learns to read. After that, they read to learn. But the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation reports that since beginning Read to Achieve, North Carolina student progress has actually declined. Anna Beavon, Read to Achieve was based on a Florida program that refused to promote students out of the third grade if they couldn't read at a third grade level. Now, most agree our program has failed. What's your conclusion as to why?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that the program is a complete failure. It's definitely been received some disappointing results from this study. What it's saying is that the pass rate for third grade reading level is at 55.9%, where it was at 60.2% previously. And I think a lot of the issue with this is that this is a very difficult topic. And it's a difficult problem to solve. And if there was an easy solution, we would have found it already.
Brad, we've spent $157 million on this since 2013. The numbers are not just bad for the third grade, but only 52% of our first graders are reading at first grade level.
And that reinforces the need for pre-K education and the importance of building that foundation. But a lot of it starts at home, and a lot of it is in suburban and rural classrooms that don't necessarily have the resources. I praise Senator Berger for leading this effort. My mother, late in her career, was a reading educator for Gerald Toller at Cooper Middle School and in Clayton. It is the concept is good. I think you've just got to keep pressing on them. More importantly, I believe the success lies in individual attention.
John, he mentioned pre-K. We had two big business leaders in North Carolina, Jim Goodnight from SAS and the head of Red Hat, come out this past week with an op-ed piece saying that part of all of this has got to start with fully funding pre-K programs in North Carolina, that if we can intervene early enough, that might make a difference. What do you think about their intervention?
Well, the legislature has been moving in that direction. People argue that it's not fast enough and that there's a formula problem, that there are some communities or some counties where the state funds require a local match the counties can't pull off, and so they say no to the money. So there is a proposal to change the funding formula for pre-K. They're resting this on recent research out of Duke University, which is interesting. That people have to understand, this is not tracking students who did pre-K versus students who are not. They're not doing that. So there's some questions about it. It is certainly, there's more evidence for this intervention, particularly the More at 4. By the way, that study looked at Smart Start and More at 4. More at 4 is doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting here. So focusing on the specific pre-K program, high quality for students who desperately need it, that's something that does have bipartisan support.
But State Board of Education member J.B. Buxton also stated this week that this is bad enough so far as third grade reading. But if you look across the board, our results across the board are only mediocre so far as performance increases. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, I think so. But I think we need to do a better job. Some of this isn't rocket science. The problem is easy to diagnose. It's the solution that we're striving to get to. I do believe, and I do support the call for more across-the-board pre-K funding. I think it's worth pointing out, though, the hypocrisy. Imagine if a Democratic governor or a Democratic legislature came up with a program, promised all these results, and 3 years later it wasn't doing it, it cost $150 million. What do you think Phil Berger was saying back in those days? So, you know, I don't think that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop it, but it's just interesting to me that we've been attacking all these programs that are trying to help for a long time, and now one by a Republican leader that hasn't delivered, and we don't hear that. The last thing is, every time we talk about this issue, it's so frustrating because we know in many schools, we know the families where these kids are coming from that are struggling not to read. We know that. We also know in many cases, not all of them, we know in many cases those kids either don't have health care, haven't seen a dentist, have all these issues, their parents have problems. We can't solve all that with the program. We can solve some of it, though, with the program, and that's the problem. And somebody mentioned individual attention, not just for the student. We have to figure out how to reach those families, or I don't think we're ever going to solve it.
Yeah,
it's driven by poverty.
Right, absolutely.
Well, there's no question about it. So, I mean, I think all of us will give praise to Senator Berger and everybody that has been involved in trying to design this and trying to improve it. That's not the problem, and I don't know that I think that just trying to point fingers at people is necessarily going to...
It is worth noting, though, that we have a lot of data in North Carolina, and we can identify, and some have, that there are schools that deal with high poverty populations that do very well. There aren't very many, but there are some, and it has to do with leadership, has to do with the way the teachers are deployed, and there are lessons...
Principals.
Yeah, it has to do with principal leadership, it has to do with the way teachers are deployed, and we need to be studying those cases. It is true that poverty is a big barrier. It is not an insurmountable barrier.
Well, when we were looking for answers to all of this, why are we actually declining? There were some suggestions that requiring students to repeat the third grade if they didn't pass their third grade reading exam put undue pressure on them and may have actually hurt results instead of helping it. You think that's an issue?
Well, I think the pressure on students today, that is definitely something that is coming up more and more when we, even in older grades when we deal with school shootings and violence on campus. There's been a lot of conversation around the pressure that kids are receiving. So I definitely think that that additional pressure on them performing is definitely a culprit.
The Florida program started off doing well. This was under Jeb Bush when he was governor of Florida. How's it doing now? Does anybody know about that?
Florida's the first or second best school system or third best school system in the country if you adjust properly. It has great benefits. The problem with this is perhaps that program explains a good chunk of it or some of it or not very much of it. This is the problem we've got, is that we don't know what reading scores would have looked like without Read to Achieve. These are challenging questions to get at. Florida is a very high-performing public school system in the United States. But attributing causation to any one particular program will be challenging.
Chris, I was interested in reading a piece by NC Policy Watch in which they were saying essentially our response to this has been to double down on policies that aren't working to start off with. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that there's some of that because we, again, getting back to the original thing, family poverty and figuring out how to address that gap, which is difficult but not impossible either. That everybody seems to want to start with the child when the child shows up at school. It's too late almost, and that speaks to pre-K, but it also helps to figure out. It helps to remind us we need to address the environment that child is raised in. Government can't do all that. We can do a lot more than we're doing.
But I agree with that, but it's important to remember that if you adjust for poverty, there are some states like a Florida, like a Massachusetts, like an Indiana who do better than North Carolina, even if you adjust for that. So there is gains that we can make even if we're only talking in the educational environment, not the broader social policy environment.
I know that there are guys in the legislature like Craig Horn over in the House who just are really distressed about all this. What's your suggestion on solutions?
Well, I think everybody at the table's hit on some. John's comment about the data is very true. We have a lot of data, and it's siloed in the Department of Social Services, in the Health and Human Services, in the Department of Public Instruction, Department of Public Safety. Sheriff Keith Stone down in Nash County has been pushing for more collaboration between his agency, Social Services Agency, and the schools to identify the families that are in poverty and begin working on strategies to make sure that they have breakfast on the table, that they've got jobs, that they've got income, food stamp. What type programs can we work on to help these people? Any
other suggestions so far as what we can do, AB?
Well, I think it's a problem if we focus on one specific thing. And I think Brad made a good point about sharing information. No issue exists in a vacuum. And this is one there where if we can have long-term policy.
All right. Any other suggestions, John,
Chris? The single
Chris?
biggest lever would be to improve school leadership, improve the pipeline of principal preparation. Putting the better principals in these schools, even high poverty schools, would help.
We need to allow principals to be much more innovative. I always tell the story of a principal in Kansas who had free washer and dryers for families who couldn't afford them if they brought their kids, and they were tutored while their parents did the laundry. There's all sorts of creative things if we allow strong leaders and support them with financial resources.
Big task. All right, now we move to the section of the program where you tell us you enjoy so much, and that is to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Brad Crone, I'll start with you.
With Walter Jones being sick, there is a lot of political jockeying going on, anticipating either a resignation or eventual passing of Congressman Jones. On the Republican side, Harry Brown, the majority leader in the state Senate, is looking at it. Jonathan Brooks is looking at it. Greg Murphy is looking at it. On the Democratic side, the big name being mentioned is former Greenville Mayor Alan Thomas.
Joe Thomas is John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Tamika Mallory is the co-chair of the Women's March. She's gotten a lot of negative attention because of her positive comments about Louis Farrakhan, a notorious anti-Semite. She is speaking at UNC Asheville, and she should be allowed to speak at UNC Asheville, even though she is a nut, perhaps. She was invited at a public campus, and I'm appreciative that people understand the best way to respond to her is to argue with her, not to shut her down.
Let the nuts speak. Is that what
Basically,
you're saying?
yes.
Chris, tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is proof of that. I was interested the Virginia State Senate, which is controlled narrowly by Republicans, on Friday, today, passed legislation prohibiting discrimination against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people in housing in the state of Virginia. North Carolina doesn't have that. A significant number of Republicans voted for it. Virginia's not that much more liberal than North Carolina. It's time to start rethinking again, protecting people, depending on who they love, from discrimination. We need to readdress that issue soon.
And it's
happening in Virginia.
Yeah, okay. All right. Anna Beavon, tell us something we don't know.
We've talked a lot about education today, but one thing that we're not talking about is student debt. And so a Lind EDU report just came out saying that the amount of outstanding student loan debt is standing at $1.52 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I understand it's something like 25, averaged out to something like $28,000 per student. So you're starting your life, you're starting a new career in the whole $28,000.
Talk about not setting people up for success.
Amen. I've got one, and that is an apology to you who are our viewers who go to our website, ncspin.com. We had a massive failure of our website this past week. It took a long time to get it back up, and I apologize for that, but we finally have done it. So we encourage you to go to our website and check out comments from these and other thought leaders in our state. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and join us next week for more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Many of the 300,000 uninsured in our state are volunteer firefighters, farmers, fishermen, and small business owners. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.